about, we don't like to think about rejection because it is painful. It's a painful situation. It can be very discouraging. One thing is incompatibility is a really important thing to think about in terms of rejection. Reframing the way we think about it, it is painful, but not thinking of it as, this is a reflection of me as a person. I'm a terrible person if this person rejects me. And we'll face rejection in all different realms in life. We'll face rejection from jobs. We'll face rejection from maybe a scholarship one day, or we might face rejection from our top school that we want to be in. So that's something that we all have to deal with at some point, even if it's not relationship related. But in a lot of dating situations, I'm sure like putting yourself out there and being vulnerable and saying, hey, you know what, I like you, or that can be a very scary thing. And rejection can feel like an end of the world. You're like, maybe it's my fault. Maybe I'm just someone that nobody wants to date. But reframing the way we think about it can really make it easier to cope with. Because if we cope with rejection like that, it's never healthy and it can't be a good outcome in that sense. One thing is incompatibility. One or both people may not be able to meet the needs of the other in a relationship. People can have different communication styles. And I think that's a huge part of things. Like some people are very quiet about conflict. Maybe they don't want to, maybe they're more of the type of person that doesn't really want to talk things out. They just want to reflect on it on their own. And then another person really feels like they have to talk out their feelings and different types of conflict. Like, I really don't like how you did this. I don't like how you leave the cupboards open every morning. I don't like how you don't invite me to movie night with your friends. And then that person on the other side might think, I just don't like to invite my significant other to movie nights. That's just for my friends, that's my friend night. So that's something that is a really important thing to keep in mind is their communication style compatible with mine? And you can have compatible communication styles that are very different too. For example, if you're a person that needs to have some alone time and then come back to a conversation later, you could say, hey, I just need some time to step away from this. And that's kind of, in a sense, a lot of people might see that as a rejection, like you don't care about me. But really, it's just about, hey, we have different styles of communicating. So that's something to really think about in terms of rejection. And a lot of time, one thing about rejection is it's non-negotiable. If someone wants to break up or reject the other person, they don't like you, that person is no longer consenting for the relationship. And that usually must be respected. And I don't know if anyone's like a really diehard rom-com person, but I used to watch them a lot. And one thing is that I noticed is that people always try to negotiate after someone rejected them. They show up to the airport and with flowers or something, and then try to persuade the other person and wear them down, saying, hey, we need to be together. We need to be together forever, or else I'm nothing without you. That's the common romantic comedy kind of, theme a lot of the times at the end. Like there's a sad part of the movie and then they come back together. But sometimes that's not always realistic, because sometimes people don't want to get back together. And it could become a situation where you're obsessively stalking the other person, and it's not good. So that's an important thing to keep in mind, is rejection is always non-negotiable. And when someone withdraws consent, you have to accept it, especially, and not give them pressure to come back together. The person who initiates the rejection has the responsibility to come back to you and say, hey, I do want to get back together, without any pressure from the other person. So another thing that I really want to talk about is the friend zone. So I know I've heard this a lot. A lot of folks tend to get upset about the friend zone because maybe they've invested a lot into that person. They really have some strong feelings. Maybe they thought that that person was giving them signals that they liked them. But I think a really important thing, and I really urge you to look at this article from Love is Respect, because they explain it in such a great way. Is if you've expressed interest in dating someone and they made it clear they don't wish to date you, the healthy response is to respect their decision. And sometimes that looks, what does that look like? You know, what do you think? How do you think about that zone or friend zone? Do you feel like there's a lot of entitlement there? So that's something to really think about in terms of if someone's like, I just want to be friends. And we can't expect any more from a person unless they've explicitly said, yeah, I want to be more than friends. So I think that's a really interesting thing that I find is a very common belief among a lot of folks, is that, especially when I was in high school, I know a lot of folks would complain about the friend zone, like, oh, this person doesn't like me. I put so much work into them, and that's almost a sense of entitlement too. So another thing about rejection is its tuition. A lot of folks think, oh, you know, rejection can't possibly have value. It's just terrible all around. But I don't like to be the type of person that's like, oh, look on the bright side, right? Because, you know, sometimes things just suck and it's terrible and you have to just accept that it's terrible sometimes. But I also think there is constructive, I believe there's a constructive element to bad things sometimes. For example, rejection is kind of a necessary evil sometimes. It's if a relationship doesn't work out, it can really teach you a lot about your habits as a person in the relationship. One red flag I always tell people is that, you know, if you're dating someone and they complain about their ex the whole time and they never say, oh, you know, I did this in the relationship that wasn't so great, you know, I slept in too often and I didn't really spend a lot of time with this person, that's a person that's not very reflective on their own flaws. And that's probably someone you don't want to have a relationship with, especially long term, because if someone doesn't acknowledge their flaws or see the ways they contributed to the end of their relationship, sometimes that can be a red flag too. If it's always the other person did this, the other person did that, except I want to exclude abusive relationships though, because that usually is very one-sided issue where the other person does do a lot of terrible and controlling things. But if a person is like constantly saying things that, you know, oh, they wouldn't let me use their Xbox all the time, and like, or they wouldn't let me do this or that, that's kind of, seeing that is kind of like, oh, that person was in a controlling relationship before, versus someone who's just unable to, you know, learn from their past relationship. And, you know, maybe it could teach you about what you do and don't like in a relationship. Like there's my last relationship, this person was very, you know, they would talk about like my body image or something like that. And you know what, I realized in my next relationship, that's not for me. I don't like it, because I think I can't tell you that everyone's gonna get an A+ on every first relationship you get, or every first relationship experience you have. You're gonna make mistakes because you're putting a lot of words into practice. Like, I don't think anyone in this group is gonna come out of this a breakup expert, right? Because it's one thing to talk about breaking up, but another thing to do it when emotions are involved. Because right now we're all very objective right now. But when we go into the world and we see this, our emotions can really, like, you know, we're not thinking rationally all the time. So that's something to really think about is, you know, really real life experience does help you learn. But this type of information and education is supposed to help guide you through that type of thing. So another thing, so one big thing I want to talk about, a lot of times I do advocate, you know, destigmatizing breaking up. We should encourage people to think breaking up isn't such a bad thing. But I also want to put this forward that in an abusive relationship, someone in an abusive relationship is 70 times more likely to be killed by their partner 6 weeks following a breakup than at any other time. And a lot of times I see I go on Reddit a lot and I see people talking about their terrible relationships, or like sometimes, their stories of like possibly abusive relationships. And a lot of times I see people say, hey, you should leave right away, break up right away, leave right now. And that's usually the first advice that people think of when they think of abusive relationship. But it can be very dangerous. Leaving a relationship is very dangerous. And oftentimes you need help safety planning. You need to prepare for that breakup. A lot of times people move states, move away really far to escape the danger of an abusive breakup or leaving an abusive partner. So I just want to say that it's not easy a lot of the time in an abusive relationship. It could be very dangerous. So my attempt to destigmatize a breakup is more for those supporting the abuser's end, more so, because it's very easy to become controlling and want to stay in a relationship. And that could be the rationale a lot of the time behind becoming controlling and obsessive, because a lot of us have been taught that you can't break up. That's a failure. Your relationship's a failure. So that's another thing I want to be in mind. If you're a survivor, this advice really isn't, a lot of this advice in terms of, oh, breaking up is a good thing, is more so not for you. Because I understand that it could be very difficult to leave an abusive relationship. So, so this is more on if you are planning on leaving an abusive partner, thinking about safety planning before the breakup and after. And before, in person, thinking about, are you going to break up in person? If you feel safe, you could break up in person, but if you're in an abusive relationship or concerned about your safety, it's completely fine to break up by text or in public place. And I think that's one thing a lot of times in a lot of healthy relationships, people say, oh yeah, you should break up face to face. And you can do that. But in an abusive relationship, it may be a lot safer. Separation is key. It's important to not, try to put, a survivor and an abuser together. That's one reason why couples counseling is never a good idea for an abusive relationship, because a lot of times abusers can manipulate the situation and it could be made a lot worse. And couples counseling is kind of focused on, oh, both people are at fault in this situation. What can we work on there? When it is one person who's being controlling. So definitely, if you feel safe, you could break up in person, but you can text too. You can text or message the person, or if you do it in public, make sure you let someone know. And that kind of goes into our support systems area, is to make sure you identify your support systems prior to the breakup. Make sure, if you're a teen, let a trusted adult and friends know, whoever you trust. So one thing I want to ask in the chat is, if anyone wants to answer this, what do you think a support system is to you? Because I feel like that is such an open-ended thing. Support systems are different for everybody. Maybe you find your teacher as a support system, or you find your friends to be your primary support system. Guardians might be your support system, or parents. So what does an effective support system look like to you? How do they treat you?
And Gina, when we're talking about this question, are we asking specifically in the context of a teen relationship? Mm-hmm. Because I know we have a lot of adult allies and service providers as attendees right now. So
definitely. Yeah, that's a good point. Yeah, that's something that you can, for the adult allies in this group, how do you think your support systems differ from a young person's support system in this sense? Yeah, that's really good, that specificity there, because I know for me as an adult, I definitely find more support in, people that I work with or people that I'm friends with. And sometimes, but I know a lot of times for teens, you look to adults for support systems. because those people are your links to resources a lot of the time. Maybe a teacher will be your link to domestic violence services at Snohomish County, or maybe your counselor is that link to a different resource. So that's something to really think about, is what does that look like to you as an adult, or what does it look like for a teen? Because I know there's a very different level of access available for adults versus teens. So that is a really good point. Yeah, and so how, even as an adult, thinking about this question too, I'm giving you a lot of questions because every situation is different, but these are things that you can think about as an adult. How can you support teens or be that support system for teens in before the breakup, in that sense? How can you be a trustworthy adult versus an untrustworthy adult? Yeah, and Chris, feel free to jump in anytime you have any input, because it is very valuable. Because Chris works, so he did a lot of work in direct services. He worked at the as assistant shelter manager for a number of years at DVS. So he's a really great, he has a lot of great input and advice too. Class schedules too. Oh, Kelly said, teens may look to parents, teachers, friends, parents, church connections, sports, coaches, and peers. Oh, thank you for adding that other end on there, is church connections. Yeah, I know that's a big one, particularly for youth groups. Sports coaches is a big one, yeah, because I know sports is huge in school. I wasn't really a sports kid, so that wasn't the biggest thing I thought of. I know my school is a really big musical school, so maybe your musical teacher or director or whoever, I don't know the jargon because I wasn't a drama kid either. I know I was a band, I was orchestra kid. So that's another area of support you could think of what areas of support do you feel that you can go to or talk to. And I remember when I was in middle school, I had an orchestra teacher. He was obnoxious. He used to tell us crazy stories. He used to tell us that his closet used to be a bomb shelter, but he was lying. And all the crazy stories like that. But he was one of my only teachers that noticed when I was going through a bad breakup, because I guess this one girl found out that I was breaking up with this guy and she told everybody, and it was a huge problem. And so he was like, so Gina, what's going on? Do you need help? What do you want me to do? And that moment, I felt like that teacher really cared about me, because they were asking, what do you want me to do? Is there something I can do for you? Offering suggestions rather than imposing suggestions as well. And he was really good friends with my mom too. So he, gave her a heads up. I was going through some stuff. He didn't tell her specifically what, because I wasn't allowed to date at that time at all. So that was another factor to think about if you're an adult that's like a service provider or not quite the guardian or parent of the child, because the first fear, or for a teen, for me, I was just worried about, are my parents going to find out? Oh no, I'm in trouble. Finding out if they're going to get in trouble too for finding out about like a relationship or something like that. That's important. Another thing is blocking access, changing passwords, making sure because a lot of times in a relationship you share information, and sometimes if that person has access to that relationship after a bad breakup, you don't know what they're going to do with it. So before you let them know about the breakup, which can really, spark a lot of issues, it might be good to block access from your social media, change your passwords, disable location settings. And the next workshop we're going to do is about digital boundaries as well. So we'll go really in depth in there about settings and different types of digital boundaries. But those are some good things to think about. And if you have any other suggestions for things that you should think about before a breakup, especially a lot of the adults in the room, because I know a lot of us have learned through experience. Let me tell you, if you're to the teens, if adults act like they know what they're doing, they don't always know what we're doing. We don't know what we're doing. We learn from mistakes. Let me tell you that secret. We pretend we know what we're doing. But the thing that helps us is our experience. We've learned over time is that, hey, this didn't work out, so I'm going to try this instead. So finding a good mentor who's an adult can be really helpful, someone that you trust. And I know not all adults are so nice, right? A lot of us can be untrustworthy, but being able to find someone that you can go to and trust, like a teacher or counselor, that can really do a lot of wonders for you and really boost your self-esteem. So the next thing is post-breakup planning. So cutting ties might be helpful, especially if your ex did not take the breakup very well. You don't have to continue talking to them if they did not take it well. Being friends is possible. It's also important to give yourself space to heal, and you might feel pressure to stay friends because other friends depend on you for that friendship. So that's something that, you know, I know that could be a very difficult thing to deal with, is if you guys have mutual friends. But good friends will recognize that you need time apart to be able to, you know, heal from this, and maybe later on things can work out. But especially if the person is abusive, it's not a good idea to still be friends sometimes. It could be very dangerous. So just thinking about that. Checking devices is really important. And this is something that we will go really in depth with in our next workshop, is to make sure you check your devices for electronic spying software. And a lot of times it's not always obvious. It could be like an app that was installed on your phone and you never put it there, especially if your partner shares a passcode, that they know your phone passcode. That's really important. And you can take it to an expert, like take it to maybe the Apple store if you have an iPad, or the Microsoft store, and they can usually help you figure out if there's software that shouldn't be on there, and turning off your location settings. One big thing is that I think is really important for folks is to mourn. You can grieve, and it doesn't mean you have to get back together, right? You might miss your ex, and it's fine to be upset. It's completely fine. It could be very devastating for a lot of folks, because I remember my sister told me about her breakup, and she was like, it's like the person died, but they're still walking around. So it can be a very devastating situation. And it can be painful, but it is necessary a lot of the time. But always remind yourself of reasons for breaking up, because I think a lot of times after a breakup, people think of the good times, and you miss those good times, right? But there were situations that made you think about breaking up and drove you to break up. So I think that's a really important thing to remind yourself of, in balancing the two, because sometimes you're like, should we get back together? And if your relationship is overall unhappy, if you think a majority of the time was just unhappy, and towards the end especially, because a lot of times people really try to impress each other at the beginning of the relationship. People are on their best behavior, and then once you become more comfortable, you start to show your true colors. In a healthy relationship, it might just be farting in front of your partner. So that's something that's healthy, but it's also like, I feel comfortable with you in a healthy way, even though it's really gross. But it can really go into, you know, they have anger issues, or they're unable to regulate their emotions in a healthy way. They become more controlling. They feel more comfortable being controlling, because they're like, oh, you depend on me now, so I can misbehave. So that's something to really think about, those reasons for breaking up, and really evaluate the relationship as a whole. And finding support is really important. Your support systems may change, because unfortunately, a lot of times, especially in abusive relationships, survivors lose their friends. And but it's important to cherish the people that do support your decision, because there are people that do support you. And it doesn't mean that they have to choose you over the other person. It's just that they have to respect you enough to understand the situation. And let folks know not to share your location with your ex, especially if they're abusive, because a lot of times people might, like, I know on Facebook, I know a lot of you teens out there might not use Facebook right now. I know it's ancient technology, but sometimes location settings can be something that you tag someone in a location just casually, but that could be very dangerous for an abusive situation. So tagging location could be a very dangerous thing. Or even if they tag it, if you want them to tag after you've left the location, or it's a location that you don't normally frequent, that's something to think about. Chris, do you have any points? Because I know this was a lot in your arena. A lot of this was in your arena too.
No, I think you've mostly hit on the big ones. We are going to be talking about location sharing and whatnot next week with the digital safety. Regarding the support system, I have found it helpful to always remind myself of the difference as a full-grown adult, as weird as it is to call myself that. It's been helpful to remind myself of the differences between what I consider my support system now. A friend is a friend because they're a support system, because that's the value they bring to my life. And I think most adults have that in their friendships. But with teenagers especially, and when you're talking about post-breakup, a lot of this is geared towards the teenage years that we're talking about right now. With teenagers especially, the friendships aren't always to that level. There's different kinds of socialization. There's different sorts of responsibilities we put on those relationships. So as an ally, it's helpful to have, could be helpful to help a teen identify who are the supportive friends and who are the, what we would consider casual friends in adulthood, maybe, but who are the friends who might not be quite as capable of supporting you, because another part of their friendship is their peers, they're teenagers, and supporting somebody going through a hard time is not always the forte of a teenager. And it can be, absolutely, but it isn't always. And that's okay too. We all mature at different rates. But if we can help a teenager going through a breakup, going through an abusive relationship, identify the friends that might not bring that value to them, but still be able to call them friends, that can be a good that we add to this conversation as well. But that's all I had on that.
Yeah, no, that's a really good point about the friends part, is who is supportive, you know, because that means a lot of different things to different people. Sometimes what I like to think about is I had a very protective mother. And so she didn't like anyone I hung out with. She was like, oh, that kid seems like trouble. Anyone I hang out with. So I think one thing that might be helpful is to identify the behaviors. You're like, oh, it's nice that your friend did that. You know, that's a really supportive friend. Or that, you know, that's not so great. You know, that's not something that, sorry, I messed up the slides, but that's something that I think is really important, rather than condemning their friend as a whole. Because that can just kind of like, I felt very defensive when I heard, oh, I don't like that person, or that person, it is kind of like, I don't like how they talk or something. I'm like, how can they talk differently? So that's something to really keep in mind is, I like to think about talking about what you do like more than what you don't like, because that encourages better behavior, and it feels more encouraging rather than I don't like this, or I don't like how they did this, because that could just feel like, oh, so much critique, oh, might as well not have friends, you know. So that's a really important way to help kind of identify when friends are being supportive and not supportive. And you can say, you know, I don't like how they didn't do this. Or especially with survivors, one thing is a lot of times, I feel like one thing is just to be encouraging and saying focus on behavior, because that person might still, like I mentioned in the mourning and grieving part, that person still loves that person. So when you tell that person that that person's terrible, you're basically kind of telling them that they have terrible decision making skills. And, you know, let me tell you, we all have like blind spots when it comes to relationships. So that's something that can be very judgmental, to condemn the other person, but it's important to just stress the behavior part of that. So one thing is red flags. Like, so one thing is like, how do I find if this person could be someone that is supportive or not supportive? And it might be looking at signs of this could possibly be a breakup. This is something that I might want to break up with them early, because a lot of times in abusive relationships, the abuse escalates and the best time to leave is earlier in the relationship. And later on, it could be a lot more dangerous. And at that point, sometimes it could be so dangerous to the point that it might be impossible to leave. So helping identify these warning signs. And I will tell you that not all of these will be like, oh, this person is straight up abusive, but it does signal controlling behavior, aspects of controlling behavior that could escalate into abusive behavior. So stalking. So some stalking behaviors, a lot of times we normalize stalking in a lot of pop culture and a lot of things. And I know when I was a teen, I referenced media hardcore in terms of relationships because I had no other reference, right? It was my first relationship. I didn't know what to do. Do you guys hold hands? What do you do? So I you kind of model that behavior after movies, pop culture, because that's what you see, or social media. I know, like, especially with hashtag relationship goals, everyone's showing their best selves of their relationship on social media, but you don't always get to see behind the scenes. So stalking might be showing up uninvited to your home or classes they aren't in, hanging out by your locker, and you didn't ask them to be there. Oops. And then the attitude is, if I can't have you, nobody can have you. And having that idea, we're going to be together forever, can be very, sometimes I don't like to think about that because I'm like, oh, you know, not every relationship succeeds for different reasons. It might not be your fault. It might not be my fault, but you know, anything can happen. I think even for people who are not in abusive relationships, it's important to think like that because anything can happen. Unwanted gifts, just like leaving. My dad is so guilty of this. I used to tell him, I was like, Dad, that's really creepy that you left like random flowers on mom's car when you were like in college. And he was like, yeah, don't judge me. And I was like, yeah, it's kind of weird. But yeah, that is a huge warning sign sometimes. And that just kind of shows that, especially if you've already rejected someone and you said, no, I don't like you, and them continuing to send you gifts is kind of that pressuring aspect of saying, oh, I have to have you. That kind of, and then we'll go into entitlement, but it's kind of almost kind of entitlement to you. Direct threats, threatening to out you if you refuse to get back together. And a lot of times this can be outing through sexual orientation, gender identity. It could be outing through like sexual activity, telling, like, especially if the young person's parents might be more religious and they don't believe in sex before marriage. That could be a very scary thing for a young person, especially if they're risking, you know, being disowned by their family. You can risk a lot by being outed like that. And it could be very dangerous too, especially if you're outed to your friends. Some people are not very, like, especially for people in the LGBTQ community, it can mean someone tries to hurt that person a lot of the times. So there are reasons why people don't want to be out of the closet that are very good reasons, safety reasons. Threats of revenge porn, threatening to post, like maybe if they were sexting in the relationship, sending explicit photos to each other because they trusted that person, and that person threatens to share it with the whole school. Or that's another form of outing as well. Threats to hurt you or your family, huge one. Threats to damage a prized possession, because sometimes in a relationship you might borrow something from the other person, and then once you break up with them, you can't get it back because that person's threatening to keep it from you. Entitlement, promises to go to therapy without showing any sustainable follow through. And a lot of times, this is something that happens a lot. People threaten to change. I mean, not threaten to change, promise to change, and nothing really happens. And I think I've had a few friends that have been in relationships that were borderline controlling. And I was always like, have they actually changed? What have they done? Did they stop doing that thing you don't like? That's really controlling. Do they still monitor you? Do they still text you like all the time? And they're like, yeah, they still do that, but I think they want to change. And I'm like, I think you got to wait until they're changed, because a lot of times people have empty promises, and they keep saying they'll do something and they'll change, and then they continue to do what they're doing. So that's kind of helpful to kind of gauge when that person is, because we all kind of want to believe in the person that people can change, right? And I think people can change. I have a lot of hope in people. But especially if it's an abusive relationship, you can't really change if you're still in the same dynamic. It's really hard. So that's something that you might need. I think a lot of people change when they have alone time and they spend a lot of time on their own and working on themselves and not really making excuses for ourselves. And that brings me to the second point, is they might make excuses for their role in the breakup. Like I mentioned earlier, people that keep talking about their ex in a really bad way and they never talk about what they did. That's a sign that a lot of times they might make excuses for their role. Feeling entitled to friendship, even if you're not ready to be friends yet. And that's why I mentioned that part earlier, that you can separate, that's fine. If you need to take time away from that person, and it also is a weird habit when you are together for a while and you're just like expected to be friends all of a sudden, that could be an adjustment in the changing of your relationship status with that person. So that's something that person shouldn't feel entitled to, is that, oh, well, we should be friends, and another thing is unwanted PDA. That could be hand holding. One thing is I've thought about a lot is promposals, or asking someone to a dance. I remember I had a few friends that they were asked to prom in high school, and they didn't really want to go with that person, but they did this whole thing in front of the whole class and they felt pressure to say yes. And this is another example of kind of expecting that person to say yes. It's kind of an assumption that that person will say yes. So that is something that it's something that's so common. Promposals, like I don't think anyone sees that and they're thinking, oh, that's kind of a red flag, right? But it's not a red flag unless that person has communicated they don't like to be put on the spot in public. And another thing is, a lot of things happen behind the scenes. Like maybe you can ask them privately and say, are you okay with doing a public thing? That could be really helpful. And this kind of goes into proposals too, because when someone proposes marriage to another person and those big public proposals, marriage is a huge decision. It's a legal decision. So that's usually what comes with that, is a lot of conversation about marriage first, and then you talk about it together. And that's something that, you kind of set expectations that way. I know, like, I've definitely talked to my boyfriend. I was like, if you ever propose to me, it better be like not in public. And he was like, okay, I know. So that's something that happens behind the scenes. It's not like, it's, you talk about things beforehand, and we only see the things that are that we don't always see behind the scenes part of it. Anything you wanted to add, Chris?
Yeah, and I think I have found my hat for this meeting, which is good because we've got 10 minutes left. But my hat seems to be regarding parental allies and just some thoughts that are coming through as we do this. Feeling entitled to friendship, even if you aren't ready to be friends yet, strikes me as something that we as allies to teens can really help with. Because if we remember our teenage years, and some of us still can, not me necessarily, but you're kind of in an insular place. Your friends are your friends, and you see them every day. And if your relationship comes from your group of friends, it comes from the classrooms you sit in, it comes from the sports teams that you're on, getting away from that person physically is extremely difficult. Um, so it's an important conversation to have about what kind of boundaries can be set up. Because if you're not ready for that friendship and they're trying to push it on you, they get 8 hours a day basically to push it upon you. So what kind of boundaries are set up? Have you talked to your teachers about at least physically distancing yourself? Do your friends know she doesn't want to talk to you? He doesn't want to talk to you? Do they know to give you some of that separation? And of course, that's bringing us back to everything we've already talked about. But it's also part of the breaking up as a teenager that maybe hasn't been thought through fully on their end, because as Gina pointed out, they're going through this huge emotional turmoil. They're still struggling to figure out their feelings towards this person. So those boundaries in a rational conversation can be helpful, and could be a helpful conversation that us adult allies can have with our, with our teens.
Mhm. Yeah, no, that's a great point. Is that 24-hour like that 8 hours a day kind of exposure to that peer pressure. It's significant. Yeah. You're surrounded by people who are telling you all kinds of different things, and then the one adult voice seems insignificant, right? Because they get more exposure to their friends and peers than they do that to adults. So that's a big point to bring up, is that pressure is very hard to get out of sometimes. And so one thing I want to share before we get into the giveaway is different stories. And I want to share these stories. I want to also just say, if you may feel triggered by this, you can definitely step away from this conversation, because I know that this will specifically talk about specific violence and issues. So if you feel like this might trigger you, since I know there's survivors in the room, feel free to step away right now. And so that's something that I want to put out there. But one thing is that Anna Boy is an example. She was part of that Mukilteo shooting in 2016, and the whole thing that gave rise to it is her ex-boyfriend's attitude about their relationship. He was always wanting to be in control of the situation. He saw photos of her on Snapchat with other young men, and he saw that she's getting on with her life without him. Entitlement. She was his dream girl, and he wanted to get back together, and he decided he wanted her back. He didn't think about it as her choice. He thought about it as, I decided that I want her back and she has to be mine. The jealousy part is, he saw Bowie with another guy at the party right before the shooting, and he got angry. And that's really what escalated it. So knowing what the root causes of these intimate violence situations is really important. And being able to deal with rejection, he had something that was like, hey, adult allies that are like, this is not okay. That's something that, and having a whole community around that idea of rejection is not okay. Being careful about what stories about romance that we share. I know Romeo and Juliet is definitely a problem, but yet a lot of times that's like, that's assigned to young people in schools to read Shakespeare. So that's something that we can really think about, is these different attitudes and behaviors. Where do they come from? What media influence has on people, and not just media influence, people that we talk to, friends, family, about relationships that we hear, some myths about relationships that we hear. And then this entitlement can come from this idea that men have to pursue women, or some kind of message like that too. So it's a very deep thing that we have to get into, is to thinking, this is such a terrible tragedy. And sometimes we get really, how could this happen? And it's a very complex thing. It's a lot of different messages, but it is learned behavior. It's cultural. It's never like a result of anything singular, like a mental illness, because there's lots of folks with mental illnesses that don't shoot up a party with their ex-girlfriend there. So that's something that's really important to keep in mind, is that idea of what is the root causes of this. And another story I want to share is Dana Fear's story. She was a student at Stanwood High School. She was killed in a murder-suicide in 2003 by her ex-boyfriend. So one thing is, he followed her to a nail salon, showing her the gun, threatening to kill himself if she didn't get back together with him. Social status, he was older than her, and he thought, I can protect her. This is from an In Their Shoes activity that was adapted from this story. And they have like different, it's a really great activity. And if anyone wants me to lead this activity at their school or at their organization, I am more than happy to do that. But this activity had a part of the abuser's perspective where he said, I'm 5 years older than her, so I can protect her. She doesn't know how cruel the world can really be. And that kind of comes from that attitude of, men are the protectors. Girls need to be protected, and that kind of gender dynamic. And gender is such an interesting construct to think about, because it can be interpreted in a lot of different ways. And this is one of the ways it's interpreted in a way that's very harmful and dangerous. Entitlement, inability to accept a breakup, even when she had to use email to break up with him after he couldn't accept it in person. So these are some stories that I feel like are important to showcase, because they really demonstrate the consequences of not accepting breakup boundaries and accepting a no when someone says no. And that's a really sad consequence and really unfortunate. And I think a lot of people face that fear on a daily basis. So leaving is very difficult. It's very complex, has safety concerns, like I mentioned, outing of someone's sexual orientation, gender identity, any type of secret they don't want other people to know. Financial dependency can be very difficult. Maybe you might be dealing with family violence at home, and you're dealing with a dating violence situation, and you can't tell your parents because maybe they'll kick you out. You're dependent on your parents or guardian to take care of you. So that could be very unstable for you. Immigration status, maybe that person might threaten to go tell ICE that this person is undocumented and they might deport that person. Language access, I think especially with such a vulnerable situation like separation violence, dating violence, people have a hard time talking about difficult situations and trauma just in their native language. But if you have to say it in a different language, it's so much harder. I had issues just ordering food at a restaurant in China. And so that was difficult enough for me, but imagine how difficult that is to speak in a different language that's not your own native language about a very difficult personal issue. Peer pressure, social pressures, like we mentioned before, that 8 hours a day, always hearing that pressure every day and no one else telling you differently from your peer group. Fear of police, a lot of communities might fear the police and they might not have good experience with police. They may have suffered police brutality in the past. So usually our first thought is, we should call 911 or call the police. And then a lot of folks might have some trauma with the police. So that's something to think about. And so one thing is like to think about, who could we call? Who can we talk to that may work with people that are survivors? So that's kind of where our organization does help people safety plan. Religious beliefs is another one. So maybe not believing in, like I mentioned that example earlier about premarital sex or something else that that person believes in. It's very valuable to them and their background. And another thing is limited dating options. Sometimes I know, particularly for people in the LGBTQ community, especially gay folks or lesbian folks, it might be hard you might be the only known gay person in your school. And if you break up with this one other person that you found that you actually liked hanging out with, then what are your options? And you might think that's your only option. So that's another thing to think about, how difficult it could be to leave in that situation. So I know change of tone here, but I do want to get to the giveaway before we go out. I know we're kind of over time, but so I'm going to I hadn't seen any submissions, but you know what? I'm just going to have all the participants who are here. I'm gonna draw names, and if you're here, I'll check that you're here, and then I'll message you about your win, right? So, okay, I'm gonna grab one. Okay, Julian? Is that Julian? I'll allow you to talk. Hi, Julian. You won.
Hello.
Hi, you want a Steam gift card. So I'll message you later about how to get that to you, and we'll definitely find a way to mail that to you. But congratulations. Woo!
Thank you.
Yeah, no problem. So one thing, oops. Sorry, I muted you.
All right, so that's okay. Yeah, that's the gift card. What's that right? What's the left side right there?
Sorry?
What's that right there on the left side?
Oh, that's the logo for Steam. That's the gift card that we're giving out.
Oh, okay. Oh,
yeah, for the video game application.
Okay.
Buy some games, or you could give it to someone else that you know who might like video games. But yeah. No, thanks for coming. So congratulations.
All right.
Yeah. So okay. So one thing I'm going to do is I'm just going to quickly. So everyone, like Julian, you can win an opportunity to get a gift card for the next few weeks. So the next week is digital boundaries, like I mentioned. And to qualify for the giveaway, this week, nobody participated in the challenge this week. But if you participate in our challenge on our Instagram and Facebook, you'll see the challenge. And what you can do is either comment your response to the challenge underneath the post, or you can respond to our story. We put up a story and you can answer on the story what your input to the challenge is. And this week it is send us a list of ways you can set digital boundaries with others through social media, through text, and why. So you can also email me your challenge as well. And if you attend that workshop, then you have a chance to win a Starbucks gift card. So that's what's going on for next week. So really exciting stuff. And I'm so glad you all were here. Congratulations, Julian. You're now a winner of a Steam gift card. And we are excited to see everyone else at the next few sessions if you can come. And we hope you can come, because I really do think that you have the power to prevent dating violence. And everything that we learned today, I hope that you can bring some of it into your lives. And this was also meant for people, just for breaking up in general, because I know breaking up is such a scary thing. And it's very difficult as a young person to deal with your first breakup too. So that's something that I really hope we can normalize, breaking up and rejection, in a way that it's not the end of the world. It's something that we can learn from, and it's painful, but we can really learn something from it. Anything, last words, Chris?
No, I think that was a fantastic way to end it today. We have the power to prevent domestic violence, whatever age group. So yeah, great job, Gina. Thank you so much.
Thank you. And I'll put up a list of resources here. If you feel like you're in a dangerous relationship, in an abusive relationship, this is our 24-hour support line. And our Instagram, if you want to participate in our challenges on social media And if you know anyone that'd be interested in these workshops, forward it to them. Let them know what's up. And I'll send out a link to the workshop, to the recording of the workshop, so that you can have access to it later and share it with folks. And we'll post it on our YouTube channel, and that will come in a follow-up email tomorrow. So I'm so glad you all attended, and please fill out the evaluations at the end, because that helps us figure out what we can do better and how we can better include different types of information that you feel like might be helpful to you. So watch out for our next workshops, participate in the next weeks of giveaway, and we will see you all there.
All right, fantastic job.
Thank
You
you.
enjoy the heck out of your weekend. We'll talk on Monday.
Yeah, sounds good. Talk to you
All right.
later.
Bye.
Bye.